and if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samuel. Well, it is now, yes, Tuesday evening here in Hungary. And as you may feel, as you probably can sense, I'm a little low in energy. Had a very grueling appointment with a dentist earlier in the day, and it's getting a little. It's a little hard to to energize myself from a sense of debilitation that always overcomes me when I have these dental visits. But I will do my best, step up to the plate and give all I have. So thank you very much, everybody who has joined me for the Tuesday night live stream. And I want to get onto a few topics that I think might be of interest to you. One is the events that took place at the in Belgrade over the weekend, as you know, and we covered this on the Gaggle. Zelensky made his visit to Belgrade. You saw, as I see, Ginny Moe says, anti-dentite. Yes, I'm a radical, rabid anti-dentite. And yes, I think they should have their own schools. That's the way I'm going to put it. They should be in their own schools. But anyway, so Zelensky was in Belgrade, and all the Serbophobes got themselves into a frothy lather because somehow Zelensky was lending legitimacy to Serbia, which is still, in the eyes of Albanians, in the eyes of Croats, in the eyes of Muslims, is somehow, Serbia is still the embodiment of all that's malign in this world. So there was a lot of anger, real anger, directed at Zelensky for having graced Belgrade. You can go anywhere you like, but you can't go to Belgrade. So we had that, and then we had this strange spectacle during the news conference involving Zelensky and Vucic, in which a German journalist, not just any German journalist, but the Balkans correspondent of the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, which is a very, very respectable, very reputable newspaper, and he asked what was really quite a
question to the president.
Shocking question. And first of all, let me just play you this question that this correspondent, the Balkans correspondent of the Frankfurter Allgemeine, asked Zelensky, and of course Vucic was on the stage with him, and watch Vucic's reaction as this journalist Michael Martins asks the question. Let's just watch this.
And a short question to the president of Ukraine, Zelensky. You have touched it partly already, but can you tell us Europeans, what can we concretely do to help you to kill more Russian soldiers, of course? I'm also asking this, have you been talking about any issues regarding defense cooperation and joint drone production with your Serbian hosts? Thank you very much.
You can see here that you can see just the response on Vucic's face. He raises his eyebrows when this German journalist, Martins, who is the correspondent of like, as I say, very, very reputable German newspaper, the Frankfurter Allgemeine, asks, well, what can we Europeans do to kill more Russians? So this is a German asking this question in Belgrade. Particularly, the Serbs have very, very painful memories of the Germans. They were twice invaded in the 20th century. They were invaded in 1914, of course, when Germany rushed in to help out Austria-Hungary, which was unable to defeat Serbia. So Germans came and bailed out Austria-Hungary and, of course, crushed Serbia. And then, of course, Hitler invaded in April 1941. And then, of course, the third painful memory for the Serbs of Germany was Germany's role in the breakup of Yugoslavia. It was Germany that was instrumental in pushing the Europeans and then also the Americans, pushing them towards recognition of the unilateral secession of the various Yugoslav republics. So Germany pushed for the recognition of Croatia and Slovenia. The Europeans were reluctant. The United Nations Secretary General Perez de Cuellar had urged against it. Germany pushed, Germany bullied, Germany cajoled the other members of the EU, and then they fell into line in early 1992 and recognized the independence of Croatia and Slovenia, and thereby precipitated the destruction of Yugoslavia and then the wars that followed. So that's three issues that Serbs have with Germany. And so here he is. He's in Belgrade and says, what can we Europeans do to kill more Russians? Now, this obviously caused a bit of an uproar in Serbia. And you say Vucic didn't say anything. Vucic, you see his facial reaction. He just raised his eyebrow, but he said nothing. But Martins, this correspondent of the Frankfurter Allgemeine, then began defending himself. So he defended himself, defended his question, and then, and I'm going to show you, the Frankfurter Allgemeine came in and deeply dishonestly, oozing the worst kind of slimy German deceitfulness, the worst kind of deceitfulness when they came in to defend their correspondent, because, of course, he wasn't acting as a journalist in any meaningful sense. I mean, his question was not the question of a journalist. It was the question of an advocate, not just any advocate, but a real nationalist, racist, pathological advocate who's saying, what can we do to kill more Russians? Here, and I'm a journalist. I work for this reputable newspaper, the Frankfurter Allgemeine. So here are a few tweets that this correspondent, Michael Martins, sent out to show. No, I'm fine. I didn't really do anything untoward. But I asked a perfectly reasonable question. So here's one tweet. Well, let me first present you the tweets. Here's the tweets that he sent out, and then I want to go back to what the Frankfurter Allgemeine said in his defense. So here's Martins, who says, surprised that so many people pretend to be surprised or even shocked by the question I asked Ukrainian President Zelensky today in Belgrade. Outside Barbie world, this is how wars are fought. Said in many times before, for example, here. And so he's quoting himself from February 27th. This is apparently his defense. He's quoting himself and says, 1944 Operation Overlord, many young Germans who aimed their machine guns at Americans and Brits storming the beaches had their whole lives ahead of them and were not evil, but they still had to be killed to defeat evil. Same with Russians today. So there he is, absolutely defending what he had just said. So there was no misunderstanding, in his question. But they still had to be killed to defeat evil. It says many young Germans, had their whole lives ahead of them, were not evil, but they still had to be killed to defeat evil. Same with Russians today. So he's being absolutely consistent in his position, which is we should kill Russians. Again, this is a correspondent of this reputable German newspaper, the Frankfurter Allgemeine. And then he sends another tweet and says, no, dear friends from Sputnik, it is not scandalous to ask the Ukrainian president how Europe can help Ukraine to kill more Russians. That is what is needed. What is scandalous? The war of your sponsor, Putin, against Ukraine. So again, making clear, I mean exactly to kill more Russians, not kill more Russian soldiers, kill more Russians. I mean, even killing more Russian soldiers is an odd sort of thing for a supposed journalist to advocate for. And then again, he sends out a tweet, says, yep, I'm asking it. And Zelensky answered, because killing Russians, as many Russian soldiers as possible, is what is important to end the war. Besides, what I ask is that the press conference, be it in Serbia or somewhere else, is none of your business. So anyway, then this Michael Martins, wrote this report. Look at the logo of Frankfurter. The way this written Frankfurt Allgemeine with its this suggestion of Hochdeutsch, Alter Deutsch, it's really looks magnificent. And then he says there, Vucic's embrace with risk. And the two presidents also addressed another questions from the Frankfurter Allgemeine. So he's not even saying my question. He's just saying, he's so grand. He's just referring to a question from the Frankfurter Allgemeine. And he says it was based on the slightly divergent statements from Ukrainian and other defense experts that had been circulating for months regarding how many Russian soldiers Ukraine would have to kill or incapacitate each month before the Russian army would face serious personnel difficulties and Putin might be forced into peace talks. So this is always Putin is going to be forced into the peace talks. So we're justified in doing whatever we want because this is the way to force Putin into the peace talks. And then it said, when asked what Europeans could do to help Ukraine kill more Russian soldiers, no, you didn't even ask it in that way. You corrected yourself. You said kill more Russians, and the tweets that we just showed, he is quite unambiguous. He wants to kill more Russians because that's the way to get Putin to the negotiating table. And whether cooperation on defense policy had been part of his talks in Serbia. Vucic replied, we did not discuss any military cooperation today or at this time. The word today should be taken quite seriously in this context that Serbia, at least indirectly, initially mediated and financed by the US, had helped Ukraine with considerable quantities of artillery ammunition, was confirmed by the US ambassador to Serbia, Christopher Hill, in an interview with Frankfurter Allgemeine at the end of last week. And that, in fact, is correct, is that Christopher Hill had claimed that the ambassador, the US ambassador to Serbia, had facilitated the delivery of ammunition from Serbia to Ukraine via third-party intermediaries, I think Poland and the Czech Republic. Now, this is where it's really is quite interesting because, as I said, the Frankfurter Allgemeine now sensed that it was coming under some criticism, and so it felt that it needed to mount some kind of a defense. And this is the lame statement that it issued. So first we had the interpretation by Martens of what the Frankfurter Allgemeine said in his defense. So he sent out this ahead of time, an interpretation, via some tweets. So let's see what here that Martens says. Well, the Frankfurter Allgemeine statement on the press conference that took place in Belgrade with Ukrainian President Zelensky on Saturday. These are the crucial parts. During the conference, our Balkan correspondent, Michael Martins, asked the president of Ukraine what Europeans could do to help Ukraine kill more Russian soldiers. Okay? The question referred to current debates among defense experts about how the Russian army could be placed under such pressure in terms of manpower that Russia would be compelled to end peace negotiations. Well, that's just sort of nice anodyne way of putting it. He said, how do we help you kill more Russians? So very simple. Very, very simple. He didn't go into, well, that's what defense experts are saying. No, how can we help you kill more Russians? And then Martin says, however, the question was worded ambiguously, which we regret. It is not the editorial position of the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung that as many Russian soldiers as possible should be killed. No, it is exactly your editorial position. That's exactly what you're saying. You're just being caught. He just blurted this out. The Frankfurter Allgemeine supports Ukraine's right to self-defense. This is the NATO gobbledygook, as guaranteed under international law. No, it is not guaranteed under international law. You're lying, but that's okay. And calls for the Russian war of aggression to end as soon as possible. So this is Martens's summary of the Frankfurter Allgemeine's defense. But here is the actual statement from the, and as a private note, ask yourself what the right of self-defense means in the case of Ukraine today. See, these people don't know what the right of self-defense is. I was once in one of these panel discussions, and they right of self-defense, blah blah, guaranteed under international law, Article 51 of the UN Charter. That's not what Article 51 says. Article 51 says, yes, you can defend yourself in the event of an attack, but the ultimate decision rests with the UN Security Council. So you can do that up until the time that the UN Security Council weighs in. In this case, the UN Security Council did not weigh in. We know why it didn't weigh in. It didn't weigh in because Russia is a permanent member of the UN Security Council. Well, that's too bad. The UN was set up by Russia, United Kingdom, United States, and France as one of the victors of World War II. You don't like it? Tough. Don't bring up the UN Charter because fundamentally, that's the way the UN Charter goes. So Article 51 did not say that Ukraine can just do whatever the hell it wants in the name of self-defense. Because if you're going to bring up self-defense, anybody at all can invoke the right of self-defense. Russia also claims self-defense. Apparently people don't seem to be aware of that, but Russia has also claimed Article 51 as justification for the launch of its attack on February 24th of 2022. It says Article 51, because basically the provinces, the oblast of Ukraine had come under attack. These were Russian minority population, and they were under attack by Kiev. And Russia said, well, they have the right to self defense. They have the right to invoke their rights under Article 51 and invite Russia to protect them. It's exactly the same basis on which India entered the war against Pakistan in 1971 to protect the East Bengalis from massacre at the hands of Pakistan. The same right that was invoked by Turkey when it invaded Cyprus in 1974 to protect the Turkish Cypriots. You can agree, you can disagree, but there it is. So you could keep saying Article 51, but that's it's as valid as the insistence that Russia is acting in accordance with Article 51. That's why the UN Charter said, well, we have to leave it to the Security Council. But this is what the Frankfurter Allgemeine, which is this German newspaper, says. Oh, well, apparently only the people that we like, the people who are acting as our basically our clients, only they have a right of self-defense, and only they can invoke Article 51. But anyway, here is the actual statement from the Frankfurter Allgemeine, and it's a statement by the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung in response to a question from its correspondent at the press conference in Belgrade. And here we have, and then the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung has received inquiries regarding a press conference that took place in Belgrade on Saturday. There, our Balkan correspondent, Michael Martins, asked the Ukrainian president what Europeans could do to help Ukraine kill more Russian soldiers. Again, that's not what he asked, but okay. I mean, he said first kill Russians, and we've looked at several tweets of his where he uses precisely that formulation. But okay, Frankfurter Allgemeine says, he said kill more Russian soldiers, which itself isn't really acceptable for a journalist. And not just a journalist, but journalists for a leading German newspaper. This referred to current debates among defense experts concerning how to blah, 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 blah. This is typical German smarmy, unctuous drivel, whereby they want to smooth over anything untoward. Well, there's a debate going on with defense experts, create personnel difficulty. What personnel difficulty? You're killing. You want to kill as many Russians as possible. Kill Russian personnel within the Russian army in order to force Russia into peace negotiations. So that's right. As if that is going to force any kind of peace negotiations, and particularly there have been peace negotiations in Germany. Germany has been one of the leading powers trying to ensure that there be no peace negotiations. They don't want peace negotiations. They think that somehow we're going to kill so many Russians that Russia will be forced to capitulate. And then it says, the question was, however, worded ambiguously, which we regret. It is not the editorial line of the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung that as many Russian soldiers as possible should be killed. It is exactly the editorial line, as we said before. The Frankfurter Allgemeine advocates for Ukraine's right to self-defense, guaranteed under international law, blah, blah, and for an end to the Russian war of aggression as soon as possible. And then, here's the kicker. In connection with this press conference, our correspondent has been subjected to defamation and threats. This is unacceptable. So now this German, this disgusting German, this disgusting German newspaper um, presents itself as the victim. He's been subjected to defamation and threats. Why shouldn't he be subjected? He's a public figure. Public figures often are subjected to defamation and threats. He said something that was outrageous. He said it was something that was outrageous in Belgrade, which has been the victim of German aggression 3 times in the 20th century. 3 times. So subject to defamation and threats. Oh, this is unacceptable. We are the victims. Poor little Germans. We are the victims here. Freedom of the press includes the right to ask questions, and especially at a press conference. We will respond to threats against our staff with legal means. No one questions anyone's right to ask whatever question you want, but people will thought that it was a German who asked this question and formulated it in a particular way. He didn't say, hey, how do we defeat Russia? He could have said it like that. Even then, it's not really appropriate for a journalist to be an advocate in this way. But nonetheless, so he could have put it blunt. No, he said specifically, how do we kill Russians? So that was this, Michael Martins. He, of course, has been defending himself, with contempt at his criticism, even though his employer, the Frankfurter Allgemeine, has been trying to play the victim here. We're being threatened. Poor little us. Now, we keep talking about the case of Germany because it is a very troubling case because the problem was this, that there was a real issue in 1989, 1990 as to German reunification. And as we don't need to go through the whole thing because we've talked about this many times here at the Gaggle. But the fact was that there were 4 occupying powers, and all four occupying powers, every single one of them had a veto. All 4 occupying powers would have to agree on the reunification of Germany. And in 1990, the cry went up that, well, hey, 45 years, West Germany has been this model democracy. I mean, they've done everything right. I mean, they're really now, why shouldn't they be rewarded with a reunified state? So even though François Mitterrand, who was the president of France at the time, wasn't very enthusiastic about German reunification, even though Margaret Thatcher, who was the UK prime minister at the time, also wasn't very enthusiastic, the Americans, led by George H.W. Bush, were very keen, and the Russians really, obviously that had a real issue about that. So ultimately, it all rested with Gorbachev. Because Gorbachev could have absolutely said, we will not accept German reunification. We just will not accept it. We just don't think Germany has demonstrated sufficient maturity, has not demonstrated a sufficient change in attitude to warrant the recreation of the state that unleashed these 2 world wars. And whatever pressure, the Soviet Union might have come under, no doubt they would have come under pressure. There was nothing anyone can do about it. I mean, if the Soviet Union said, well, you know what, we're not moving any of our forces out of East Germany, they're staying put, and we're not going to tolerate reunification, which is, the Soviet occupied zone, which eventually became the DDR, it's going to stay as is, and there it is. So they made that. Gorbachev was, I don't know, seemed to accept, the sort of the banalities of uh, globalism and whatever. Seemed to accept that, hey, this is we're into a new era. The old type of foreign policy, militaries, and clashes over borders and redrawing borders, and occupying lands and so on. That's all gone. This is a new era of computers and information, and pick your own piece of gobbledygook. Whatever you say, Gorbachev signed on to it. So he agreed, and as I've said, and I'll say it again because it's worth saying, Germany immediately repaid the world, having first said on September the 12th, 1990, at the 2+4, they had to rush this through because there had been no peace treaty. Germany had never signed a peace treaty with the occupying power, so they had to rush this through. They had to rush the peace treaty through in order to get the reunification. Because there was such a mad scramble in 1990 to get that reunification done that they said, well, what are we going to do about there's no peace treaty? 45 years after the end of World War II, there's still no peace treaty. So they had to rush that through. So in September the 12th, they finally signed a couple of pages, which was the peace treaty. That was the 2+4 treaty. And there it was in that 2+4 treaty, the 2 being the West and East Germany, and the 4 being the 4 occupying powers. So there it was in that 2+4 treaty, which is, as I say, it's only about 2 pages. Henceforth, only peace will emanate from German soil. Henceforth, only peace will emanate from German soil. Boom, they settled it September 12th. October the 3rd, which means just 3 weeks later, Germany becomes one state, and not, but not all. This is the key. Not all of the occupying forces withdraw from Germany. Who doesn't withdraw from Germany? Well, the Americans don't withdraw from Germany. The Soviet forces, yeah, they withdraw from Germany. Soviet forces, boom, that's it. So there's a major geopolitical shift against the Soviet Union because their forces are withdrawn. East Germany no longer exists. Once East Germany doesn't really exist, then the Warsaw Pact no longer exists. But the United States continues to occupy Germany. There are no Soviet forces, but there are American forces. But how did Germany repay? How did Germany demonstrate that henceforth only peace will emanate from German soil? How did it? It was through its rushed recognition of the breakup of Yugoslavia, as I was saying earlier. That was it. That was its first act. The first act of a united Germany was the recognition of the unilaterally secessionist republics. So now you hear it from this guy, Michael Martins, who's I think his great grandfather had served in with the Wehrmacht in World War II. But again, that doesn't matter. I think it was his grandfather, not his great. His grandfather served in World War II. Again, you can't hold the sins of the grandfathers against their grandchildren. However, it's still, there he is. He's the grandson of someone who had served in the Wehrmacht, and then, as happened with many who had served in the Wehrmacht and who had survived World War II, they moved their way up within the West German apparat, that the wonderful model democracy that was West Germany. So all the Wehrmacht and the whole sort of Nazi bureaucracy just simply made a smooth transition into West Germany. And one of the figures who did that was, of course, Reinhard Gehlen. So Reinhard Gehlen was a very important figure in the Wehrmacht. He pretty much sort of ran the intelligence operations on the Eastern Front. So he knew a great deal about the Soviet Union because that's where he served during World War II. And he surrendered to the Americans, but he was very smartly he presented the Americans and said, "Hey, if you want somebody who knows a great deal about the Soviet Union, I'm the man." And he had a whole bunch of files and microfiches and everything else that he showed to the Americans, and says, "Hey, I can be pretty useful to you." And he did indeed become very useful. He created the Gehlen organization, which became the sort of the nucleus of the German intelligence service. And then after the Gehlen organization was taken over by Adenauer's West Germany, and it became the Bundesnachrichtendienst, which still exists to this day. And the reason I bring this up, the Bundesnachrichtendienst, is that this new government of Friedrich Merz wants to expand the powers of the Bundesnachrichtendienst because he's done such a fantastic job for West Germany. And again, the extraordinary thing is that all of this is quite forgotten. They're all celebrating. They're celebrating this year the 70-year anniversary of the creation of the Bundesnachrichtendienst, and of course, no one really says, "Hey, this organization, this Bundesnachrichtendienst, was created by Reinhard Gehlen." Reinhard Gehlen, the guy who had reached the most senior levels of the Wehrmacht during World War II. But anyway, so the German government, because it now openly is talking about essentially of a war with Russia. That is, it wants to expand the powers of the Bundesnachrichtendienst, and then, of course, which is their kind of CIA, MI6, and then they also want to expand the powers of the Verfassungsschutzamt. I think that's their domestic intelligence service. So part of it is obviously about the general hysteria over the threat from Russia. But a lot of it is also about the rise of the AfD, which is giving Merz in particular, because it's a party on the right, is giving him real headaches. And they're trying to figure out how they can deal with the AfD. And so by creating this atmosphere that Germany is under attack from without and from within. So we're under attack from without, so we have to do something. We need to expand the powers of the Bundesnachrichtendienst. And from within, which is from the AfD, we say we have to expand the powers of the Verfassungsschutzamt. So this is we've now got the perfect storm in Germany. And so here is a story from yes. All right, let me think. I thought I had it, but let's try again. The one I want to look at. Yeah, this is it. So yeah, this is the story about the expanding the powers of the security state. All happily, institutions created in on the back of the Nazi Germany, and so here is a story in Euractiv. Germany plans to give intelligence services sweeping new powers. And here, Germany's cabinet is due to meet Wednesday, that's tomorrow, to vote on a planned reform to give the Foreign Intelligence Agency, the BND, and the Domestic Intelligence Agency, the BFV, significantly broader powers. When the government took office last year, strengthening Germany's intelligence capabilities was already one of its major security reform pledges. The aim was to give the country's intelligence agencies considerably more powers than they currently have. Of course, I don't doubt that for one moment. The aim was to give the country's intelligence agencies considerably more powers than they currently have. This is seen as necessary in light of the changed security environment following Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022 and increasingly aggressive hybrid threats against Germany. Concerns over whether the close partnership with the US intelligence community can continue under the Trump administration also accelerated reform. According to German officials, there have so far been no restrictions on intelligence cooperation, and CIA Director John Ratcliffe is held in high regard by his German counterparts. Of course he is. And then it says, nevertheless, a long-standing problem remains. Oh, what is this long-standing problem? Compared with their international counterparts, German intelligence agencies still have significantly fewer powers. Damn these Germans. So we had the Frankfurter Allgemeine, we're being persecuted, we're the victims here. We're poor little Germans, we're the victims here. German intelligence agencies still have significantly fewer powers. Or why? What fewer powers do they have? While their analytical capabilities are highly regarded, German agencies often rely on foreign partners to obtain intelligence. This is particularly true of warnings of imminent terrorist attacks, which almost invariably come from the foreign intelligence services and help prevent attacks. Now, this is the usual kind of garbage, codswallop crap that you get in the mainstream media. Oh, well, we just can't do these things because of the way our constitution is written. We simply can't do these things. It's a legacy of World War II. We're under restraint. Hey, we've got our hands tied behind our backs. And we are the model democracy. We just don't do those things. Well, that's very strange because the media have reported many times in the past all sorts of activities that the Bundesnachrichtendienst has been up to, such as who armed the Croatian forces during the 1990s. That was the Bundesnachrichtendienst. That was the Germans. The Germans were involved in that. Who armed the KLA, the Kosovo Liberation Army, in Serbia during the 1990s? Again, it was the Bundesnachrichtendienst. All of that was reported in the media. And so, we're being. There's always the assumption that none of us has any memory, and there's we simply can't do this. We can't be involved in these things. It's like they say, we can't German, because of our constitution, we're not involved in any military activities outside of Germany. Well, that's a lie. Germany is continually involved in military activities outside of Germany. This is a regular thing. Again, obviously, in the case of the 1999 bombing of Yugoslavia, the Luftwaffe was involved in all of that. But even more importantly, Germany has been very actively involved in Ukraine, in the war against Russia in Ukraine. But you see, this is the way these Germans, they always do this smarmy thing of the constitution, the basic law prevents us from doing this. This was very, we just can't go against the basic law. It's not, we have a special responsibility. We just can't do those things. No, Germany is doing all of those things. And so now, but this is how they justify every activity. Well, we have to get rid of these constraints that we're under. We're under these severe constraints, and so we we've got to acquire the same powers that MI6 and CIA have. And then here we have the overhaul of the BND Act will more than double the number of provisions or individual rules that set out the blah blah, set out the agency's powers. This is necessary in part because the BND is set to receive significantly broader powers for strategic signals intelligence. The current draft also explicitly authorizes operational measures. BND personnel will be allowed to engage in substantially more proactive operations. Oh, I'd love to know about these proactive operations that the BND personnel will be involved in, including the sabotage of weapons production where there is a concrete threat. The BND would likewise be given greater leeway to operate proactively in cyberspace. Oh, good. And then one important change concerns oversight surveillance measures that currently require approval from the G10 Commission, a body whose members are selected by the Bundestag that oversees requests to restrict the privacy of correspondent posts and telecommunications, would in future fall under the responsibility of the Independent Control Council, and then so on. So the body established by the bodies and composed of former judges. Yeah, they're just going to get. I mean, there's not going to be any judges and oversight any more than there's any serious oversight for the eavesdropping that goes on in the United States. Anyway, Germany's domestic intelligence agency, the BFV, is also set to receive significantly broader powers. The draft legislation states that the BFV would be permitted to install its own sensors to include inside the private home. Oh, that's good. That's really great when you have put in sensors inside a private home. And whose private home are they going to put these sensors in? I give you three guesses. And use existing sensors, such as the smart speaker belonging to the occupant, to obtain information. And then here is the Der Spiegel, and then note the headline: the BND is said to be given the license to strike back. Of course, it's always defensive. We're striking back. Russia is waging a hybrid war against Europe, but the BND and the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution, this is the BFV, are currently only permitted to collect and analyze information. They just can't do anything. The poor dears, they just can't do anything. According to information obtained by Spiegel, the German government is now planning a major reform. And then BND chief Martin Jaeger sounded assertive: "We must and will be Germany's first line of defense." Jaeger said in April at the ceremony marking the 70th anniversary of the BND. I love this. I mean, you gotta kind of savor these words. Give me the first line of defense. The 70th anniversary. Oh, well, let's look back. The 70th anniversary, and Reinhard Gehlen, the founder of the BND. And remember, not only was he the founder of the BND, Gehlen carried on through to the end of the 1960s. So there's 1969. Everybody knew what the new West Germany was about. Everyone knew about how all the members of the SS had been essentially integrated within the German military, and that members of the SS had been integrated within Gehlen's BND. Everybody knew all this. But since the Soviet Union was deemed to be so evil, so horrible, so monstrous, that all of this was, of course, justified. And this is why it's important to look at this. Why it's worth going over this again and again and again. However tedious it may seem, that what Germany is now doing is, in a sense, a continuation of what Germany was doing during the 1950s, ever since the glory days of Reinhard Gehlen, that essentially they're saying, well, we were on the right side. We were really on the right side in World War II, because the really evil people, the really bad people, the real enemy was the Soviet Union, were the Russians. They were really the enemy. Hitler made some mistakes. He did some stupid things. Shouldn't have started a fight with the Jews. That never ends well. But fundamentally, Germany was on the right side, and that the real villain was always Russia. And here you'll find that there are an awful lot of people in Europe who will agree with that and say, yeah, of course, the really evil, the real threat has always been the same. It's always the Russians. The Russians are the real threat. When some, nauseating creep like Radek Sikorski, the Polish foreign minister, why does he continue to talk? Why is he always, every time he opens his mouth, why is he always denouncing Russia? You think, well, that's very strange. Why, after all, it was Germany that launched this attack on Poland in 1939. It was Germany that destroyed Poland. But he doesn't say anything about Germany. It's always Russia. And that's the point. And that's what Germany is now doing. And in a way, it's a continuation of what the Bundesrepublik, the Adenauer's Germany, and all the successive leaders of Germany, that all tried to do was to say, well, we really were not that bad. We've got a bum rap in history. We've really been unfairly picked on, because the really bad person, the real enemy, was Stalin and the Soviet Union. And we were on the right side in opposing the Soviet Union. And you will get many people in Europe today, all the Radek Sikorskis and the Baltic states, and many of the East Europeans who say, yeah, the real villains wasn't really Germany. Hitler was bad, but nothing in comparison with the Soviet Union. And that's why when you read these things on today's Germany, they're essentially coming out of the woodwork. That's and in a way it was always there. It was implicit. It had to be subdued a little bit in the good old Reinhard Gehlen era. But now the Germans don't even pretend. They're pretty much saying, that when Michael Martin says, this Frankfurter Allgemeine reporter says, well, how do we kill more Russians? They're not even pretending anymore. Yeah, this is what we need to do. We need to save European civilization. That's what Germany was trying to do in the 1930s. But bloody Hitler, he just, stupidly, got himself into this fight with the Jews. He should never have done that. Hitler was a bloody Austrian. He picked up this, insane anti-Semitism in Austria, and he foisted it on us. We never really wanted it, but we need to focus on the real enemy, which is Russia. And so this is why it's so important when we read these kinds of articles. Oh, this Jaeger. And so, we're under attack from Russia. Well, let's see. You're under attack from Russia. Who started this? Who started these attacks on Russia? Even if that's true, even if what this BND, this Bundesnachrichtendienst chief says, even if that's true, let's say we accept, the Russia's mounting a hybrid attack on Germany. We don't know because we haven't seen any evidence, but let's assume it's true. Who started this? Who started it was it was Germany. We got itself very heavily involved in this war in Ukraine. It had nothing to do with Germany. Germany got itself involved, and it's Germany that has been heavily involved in arming and financing Ukraine. So if the Russians now are indeed waging this hybrid war against Germany, well, you provoked it. You had to have known this is how the Russians would react. And just to go back to the point about the Radek Sikorsky and these people like Sikorsky who devote all of their energies to denouncing Russia, you have to keep in mind, before the German invasion of Poland, which came out of the blue, it was always a bit of a surprise because Poland was seen as an ally of Germany's during the 1930s. Poland was the first country that Hitler signed a non-aggression pact with. He signed, it was one of his first diplomatic coups on coming to power. He signed the non-aggression pact with Poland, and Poland was seen to be a kind of a ally of Germany's. And of course, it was an ally of Germany's because, of course, the project, as Poland saw it, Poland always saw the project that was that Germany, along with its partner Poland, would attack the Soviet Union and would start carving up the territory of the Soviet Union among themselves. Poland kind of miscalculated, didn't realize that Hitler also had other plans, and Poland would have to make all sorts of concessions itself before it got its hands on the booty. I mean, Poland wanted to get its hands on the Soviet booty, but Hitler said, "Well, that's fine. You get your hands on the booty, but in the meantime, you're going to make concessions to us. We want Danzig back." I mean, that's just you never should have got Danzig, and then we need it back. But anyway, so then we have this the Spiegel, the story about the Bundesnachrichtendienst and what they're up to, and then here. So it says, a few weeks earlier at the Munich Security Conference, the top official had gone even further. This is the BND chief, Martin Jaeger, had gone even further. He announced robust countermeasures against Russia's so-called hybrid warfare in Europe. We have to show Moscow that we are capable of doing similar things so the other side can also feels pain. Well, this is nice. It's always good to have Germany saying we have to show Moscow that we are capable of doing very similar things so that the other side also feels the pain. Again, you wonder, what are these other things you're planning on doing? And then, at what point are you going to turn around and scream, Article 5, Article 5, Article 5, you must all come and defend Germany? In the event of a specific threat situation, the BND would also be permitted to conduct expanded intelligence measures against a foreign power. In such a situation, the agency would be allowed to take active measures, such as manipulating another state's arms production. I wonder what that means, manipulating another states. You mean you're going to be blowing up arms factories in Russia, manipulating another state's arms production? Although not explicitly stated in the draft legislation, the current threat from Moscow is likely to fall under this new provision. As an example of a possible counterattack, security circles cite the sabotage of Russian drone factories. Now, once Germany starts talking along those lines, then you're pretty much all bets are off. And I mean, I've said this before. I just don't think Russia's going to put up with this from Germany. It's just, Germany's just more trouble than it's worth. Ultimately, there's, I think Russia has the red line. I think to the extent that we know what the Russian red line really is, but the red line is no more Barbarossas. I mean, we're not going to put up with another Barbarossa, and therefore, Germany going on like this, we're going to do sabotaging this, and we're going to manipulate the arms production and whatever. It all sounds like Germany's planning another Barbarossa, but in a little bit more sophisticated way. That's why I think that will be that's the Russian red line, that they will take whatever measures necessary against Germany, to deal with that problem at an early stage, not wait to another June 22nd, 1941. Anyway, so drone factories, and then the reform is prompted by Vladimir Putin's increasingly aggressive actions. Since the invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Russia has further intensified its shadow war in Europe. Notice again, shadow war employing methods ranging from cyber attacks and fake news campaigns to acts of sabotage. And then, for example, in July 2024, a package containing a time detonated incendiary device went up in flames at Leipzig airport. And then we had this drone at Leipzig again. And then almost simultaneously, packages also ignited in Poland and the UK. The GIU is believed to be behind the operation. But of course, there's no evidence whatsoever. There could be any number of explanations why things are blowing up in warehouses, since, I don't know, hundreds of tons of ammunition is making its way across the European continent to Ukraine. Chances are they're going to be accidents. Chances are things are going to explode because you're just rushing stuff through, sending it all onto Ukraine. And so while they're temporarily housed in storage depots, they're going to go off. But either way, it's Europe that has decided, led by Germany, that has decided to wage this proxy war against Russia. But the way that Der Spiegel presents it, and the way most of the German media present it, this is an unprovoked attack by Russia on Germany, and that in the face of this unprovoked attack, Germany is taking retaliatory measures. And then here, not only BND, but also the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution is to be granted additional powers in the future. Agency head, Sinan Zelen, had been talking for months. What kind of a name is that? Sinan Zelen had been talking for months about transforming his federal agency into a counterterrorism service. So where are the terrorists? Who are these terrorists? Well, we know who they are. This is the Alternative for Deutschland, or the political forces that you don't like. The mere collection and analysis of information on various extremist groups is to become a thing of the past. Instead, the agency is to focus on spies, terrorists, and violent enemies of the Constitution and actively thwart their plans. And then here is this guy. What a charming face. He's this Zelen guy. He is this, his name is Sinan Zelen. So let's take a look at his face. No, this is the kind of face that Marty would usually introduce into the conversation. Hey, well, that's a face to cheer us up on a cold, wet day. That's Sinan Zelen, the head of the office, the Verfassungsschutzamt. Yeah, and when you look at that face, he kind of looks a little like Heinrich Himmler. I mean, it's not, but very much the smarmy face of the new Germany. But anyway, so according to the draft law, the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution will in future be allowed to secretly access the computers and mobile phones of targeted individuals. There it is. The computers and mobile phones of targeted individuals, namely the government's political enemies. And not only read chats, but also comprehensively examine the devices under certain circumstances. In technical jargon, called online search. What would also be new is that 16-year-olds can already be recruited as so-called V people, as paid informants for the Office for the Protection of the Constitution. I love this kind of thing. 16-year-olds. We'll have them informing for the secret police. There's a secret police using 16-year-olds as their informers. So nothing very much changes. As you can say, this is the new Germany, very much like the old Germany. This is justified by the increasingly younger age of right-wing extremists. There it is. And there it is. What would also be new is that 16-year-olds can already be recruited as so-called V people, as paid informants for the Office of the Protection of the Constitution. This is justified by the increasingly younger age of right-wing extremists. That's it. So there it is. That's who are you really targeting? I mean, certainly not, Islamists, who kind of plow their cars into Christmas shoppers or who start chopping people's heads off. That's not the enemy. No, it's right wing extremists. The National Revolutionary Youth, the youth organization of the neo Nazi party, is cited as an example. No one's ever heard of it, but you can always just cite it as an example. And then even more far reaching is another paragraph in the draft law, like the Bundesnachrichtendienst, the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution, should also be able to covertly influence an attacker's means of committing an act in case of special threats. This includes, among other things, rerouting data streams during cyber attacks or influencing goods whose export from Germany is prohibited. It would therefore be conceivable, for example, that the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution could secretly intercept a shipment containing components of Russian missiles and render them unusable. No, that's not what it's saying. It's saying we can, supposedly will intercept a shipment and then we will hand it over to Ukraine. That's what it's saying. That's not to render it unusable. Of course, you're supposed to render it unusable. No, that's the issue. Issue basically is to deliver it for Ukraine. And then here we are. And then here, in other words, just to show us what a wonderful country Germany is. We have politicians are in Berlin. So Russian House is a kind of, it's the Russia's version of the Goethe Institute, the British Council. It's a cultural center. The Institut Français. Every country have their cultural institutions, funded obviously by their respective governments. The whole point is to promote that nation's culture. So the Institut Français, they show French films and have readings from French writers. So Russia does the same thing. They play Russian music and have readings from Russian novelists. But no, they have to be closed. Cultural is institutional espionage center. The Foreign Office remains reserved, but politicians across party lines, of course it's across party lines, has to be across party lines, are calling for tougher action against the Russian house in Berlin. By tolerating it is projecting pure weakness. Following new allegations of a spy center at the Russian house, allegations. No, not, we found a spy, they're just allegations. Several politicians are calling for the institution's closure. This house is a symbol of our weakness and Russian influence, says the CDU foreign policy expert Roderick Kiesewetter, who's one of these most disgusting human beings. Anyone who's on Twitter, it was always will come across this creature, Roderick Kiesewetter. We're not closing it because we believe that the Goethe Institutes in Russia would then be closed. But so what? Then they'll just be closed. So let's close the Goethe Institutes. I mean, they don't need Goethe anyway. And the spokesman for the German Foreign Office referred on Monday to existing bilateral agreements between Germany and Russia regarding real estate matters. These agreements also apply to the Goethe Institute in Moscow. Both institutions are therefore directly linked. So we close down the Russia House, then they are going to close down the Goethe Institute. According to the spokesperson, part of the agreement stipulates that Germany and Russia each cover the property tax for their respective properties in Berlin and Moscow. These agreements cannot simply be revoked. But the politicians, particularly this Roderick Kiesewetter, who's CDU, he's the one who's wants this closed down. He doesn't care about Goethe Institute, Goethe, Schmote, what the hell. The investigative team from the WDR and the Süddeutsche Zeitung reported last week on an assessment by the French Interior Ministry. It stated that the Russian house was being used as a cover by the Russian secret services. Well, how do you know this? Because the French Interior Ministry says so. How does the French Interior Ministry know what goes on in the Russia house in Berlin? Well, the French Interior Ministry said, that's it. Well, the French, they should know. They're very big on culture, the French. Similar accusations have been leveled against the institution, founded in 1984 in the past. At the time, the Russian House stated in response to an inquiry that it was a cultural institution and that its activities were based on existing bilateral government agreements. Kiesewetter emphasized that the facility's energy consumption was considerably higher than it should be for the 100 people living there. So apparently Kiesewetter knows how much energy 100 people should use up. The cultural offerings are unusual, but we assume because the electricity consumption is also so high that there are technically sophisticated devices there. I see. It has to be technically sophisticated devices. That's why they're using a lot of electricity. And that people are being housed there who, in the Russian sense, also need to be housed there, said the CDU politician. I don't know what the hell that means. Anyway, the chairwoman of the European Parliament's Defense Committee, Marie-Agnes Strack-Zimmermann, she's from the Free Democrats. They're the people who can't even get to 5% of the vote, and they can't even get into the Bundestag, but they're always around. They're kind of ubiquitous. The Free Democrats spoke out in favor of closing the facility. Of course you did. The Free Democrats, they're the kind of the libertarian. They're a little like the Liberal Party in the UK. Supposedly for libertarian, but of course this libertarian says in favor, she wants to close the facility. Well, of course, what else would a libertarian want but to close down a cultural institution? Right in the heart of Berlin sits, let me say this quite clearly, the enemy of freedom, and we are just standing by. And this is intolerable, she told Welt. Sarah Nanny, the Green Party's defense spokesman, of course, so now the Green Party gets in on the act, told the broadcaster, we're letting Russia walk all over us. One consequence Germany could draw, she said, would be to close Russia House. What Germany is currently projecting, pure weakness. This is the Greens. The Greens saying pure weakness. We need to close the Russian cultural centers down. This is familiar. But I have to, in this wonderful spirit of continually baying for war against Russia. It was very nice the other day that South Ossetia made a comeback. South Ossetia, everyone, most people have forgotten about South Ossetia, the war in 2008, which launched a lot of the current wave of Russophobia. I mean, we can't really go into the details of what happened in 2008. South Ossetia had been an autonomous oblast in Georgia. These were, the Soviet Union created this very complex patchwork of regions and territories and republics and oblasts, and it was really very, very complicated. I mean, so long as the Soviet Union stayed in place, then no one really questioned the way the whole thing, this patchwork was put together. But once the Soviet Union disintegrated, all these things became a problem. And the South Ossetia really never wanted to be inside Georgia. There was the Bolsheviks and particularly Stalin, had inserted this autonomous oblast into Georgia. But in any case, once Georgia became independent, the South Ossetia said that, well, we don't really want to be a part of an independent Georgia. And this rabid nationalist in Georgia, Gamsakhurdia, launched a war against South Ossetia in 1992, and then the Russians stepped in and saved South Ossetia, and then they stayed there as a kind of permanent peacekeeping force that was eventually sanctified by the United Nations, so through a UN Security Council resolution. But so they stayed there. So from the time of Gamsakhurdia's war, they were there from 1994 through to 2008. But what then happened was that there was the color revolution in Georgia, with and the rise to power of Mikhail Saakashvili. And Saakashvili, of course, wanted to be desperate, wanted Georgia to be a part of NATO and the EU. But he had one problem, which was that NATO couldn't induct member states that had conflicts ongoing on their territories. So in 2008, April 2008, when NATO issued its statement, that notorious statement of April, the Bucharest Declaration, which said that Ukraine and Georgia will be members of NATO, well, Saakashvili took that as a signal. Well, he has to now pull his finger out, get cracking, and resolve these territorial disputes that were on Georgian soil. So it wasn't just South Ossetia, but there was also Abkhazia. So he needed to resolve both so that he can then turn around. Here, we're now ready for NATO membership because we've resolved these disputes on our territory. So he decided to end the kind of the status quo, or the frozen conflict that had prevailed ever since the Russians sent in their peacekeepers in 1994. So from 1994 through to 2008, somebody says here, Taichua. Yeah, he was Taichua. He was absolutely off his rocker. So anyway, from 1994 to 2008, there was the peacekeepers, and there was some kind of peace between over South Ossetia. But anyway, he launched this attack on South Ossetia. The Russians returned once again and easily defeated Georgia. Now, there's nothing startling about any of this, and there were a number of EU reports that said, this war in 2008 was started by Saakashvili. Saakashvili launched this attack on South Ossetia. But lo and behold, here we are, 2026, 18 years later. A lot of people have now forgotten about that war, and suddenly, out of the blue, come the usual gang, the NATO gang, the big shots, the big powers of Europe, issuing thunderous statements about denouncing Russia over South Ossetia. So here's the statement that was issued the other day by the key powers. These are the key powers in Europe. 18th anniversary of Russia's illegal invasion of Georgia statement. So this was, Italy managed to get in on the act. Normally we have the E3, which is France, Germany, and the UK. So Italy was managed to get itself promoted into the, it's like, it's the Champions League. The top 4 clubs go into the Champions League knockout. So here, Italy managed to make its way into the big 3. The UK has joined France, Germany, and Italy in condemning Russia's ongoing activities in the occupied breakaway regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. And here's spokespersons for the governments of the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and Italy said August the 7th is a date when we remember the grave consequences of Russian imperialism. Well, it's a that's Russian imperialism. It's UK, France, Germany, and Italy. I love listening to lectures about imperialism from the UK, France, Germany, and Italy. On this day in 2008, the Russian Federation took military action against Georgia, further damaging Georgia's territorial integrity by occupying the Georgian regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. 18 years after the Russian aggression, we reaffirm our full support to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Georgia within its internationally recognized borders. We welcome the Republic of Nairo's decision to withdraw its recognition of the so-called independence of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. We urge states that have established diplomatic relations with these entities to follow this example. And then we reiterate our condemnation of Russia's ongoing military presence in the occupied breakaway regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia in violation of international law, as well as Russia's obligations under the six-point agreement of August 12, 2008. Russia's ongoing militarization of Georgia's occupied territories poses a serious threat to the security of Georgia and to regional and European stability. And then in the October 2025, the European Court of Human Rights found the Russian Federation guilty of a number of violations committed in the occupied breakaway regions, including excessive use of force, ill treatment, unlawful detention, and unlawful restrictions on day-to-day movement across the administrative and boundary lines between Georgian controlled territory and Russian occupied territory. We urge Russia to implement the rulings of the European Court of Human Rights. We are concerned about the latest developments in South Ossetia. The agreement on deepening alliance and cooperation signed on the 9th of May between Moscow and the de facto authorities of South Ossetia further violates Georgia's sovereignty and territorial integrity in clear breach of international law. This document, as well as the appointment of a Russian citizen to head the region, raise concerns on a possible full-fledged annexation of the region, which would not go unanswered. Now, all of this is just absolute crap because, of course, there's nothing magical about any of these borders. These were borders drawn up by Stalin. That was Stalin. Stalin created this patchwork of states, and then, of course, in the chaotic breakup of the USSR, a lot of people found themselves in republics that they didn't want to be a part of. It was one thing to be a part of the Soviet Union. It's quite another to be a part of a Georgia that was first run by this lunatic Gamsakhurdia and then run by another lunatic, Saakashvili. But what is also amusing, of course, is that none of these states, UK, France, Germany, and Italy, have the slightest respect for Georgian sovereignty, because as we saw last year, they were interfering time and time again in internal Georgian politics, because the new government of Georgia decided to pursue a kind of a neutralist policy, neither aligned with NATO and the EU nor aligned with Russia. And this infuriated, as always does, it just infuriated Brussels, infuriated Washington, and they went out of their way to interfere in the Georgian election and refused to recognize the result of the Georgian election, screamed Russian interference, Russian interference. But this new government in Georgia is not particularly pro-Russian. It's just not particularly pro-NATO and the EU. So they have no respect for Georgian sovereignty. The reason why they insist on maintaining the territorial integrity of Georgia, despite this being a completely arbitrarily drawn up territory, is for the same reason why they insisted on not recognizing the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Yugoslavia and the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Serbia. Why? Because they only recognize sovereignty and territorial integrity of those states that they think will be client states of NATO, because they saw Serbia as potentially an ally of Russia's and potentially a problem for NATO. They wanted to see Serbia break up, and which is why they bombed Serbia and eventually stole Kosovo from Serbia. Anything that weakens Serbia is a good thing. So therefore, we have the situation where now they're screaming about Georgia. Russia needs to leave Georgia. Now, the problem that the UK, France, and Germany and Italy have is that the international report by the EU, the European Union, actually said that this war in 2008 was provoked by Saakashvili. That's an EU report. I mean, we can't go. It was a 4-volume report. We obviously can't go through that. But here is okay, blah 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 blah, and then here, just as this is published by the International Committee for the Red Cross. They just published a highlight from that EU report, and this is the source. This is from Independent International Fact-Finding Mission on the Conflict in Georgia, and then it says, particularly here, this is on the 9th of the 7th to the 8th of August 2008, a sustained Georgian artillery attack struck the town of Chikanvili. Other movements of the Georgian armed forces targeting Chinvili and the surrounding areas were underway, and soon the fighting involved Russian, South Ossetian, and Abkhaz military units and armed elements. It did not take long, however, before the Georgian advance into South Ossetia was stopped. In a counter-movement, Russian armed forces, covered by airstrikes and by elements of its Black Sea fleet, penetrated deep into Georgia. The confrontation developed into a combined interstate and intrastate conflict, opposing Georgian and Russian forces at one level of confrontation, as well as South Ossetians, together with Abkhaz fighters and Georgians at another. After 5 days of fighting, a ceasefire agreement was negotiated on the 12th of August 2008 between Russian President Medvedev and Saakashvili and Nicolas Sarkozy. Does anyone remember him? The latter acting on behalf of the European Union. An implementation agreement followed on the 8th of September 2008, again largely due to the persistent efforts of the French president. And then here they go, the background. On the 9th of April 1991, Georgian independence emerged out of a severe crisis following the downfall of the Soviet Union. There was one important legacy from the Soviet era, though: the subdivision of Georgia into 3 political territorial entities, including Abkhazia, South Ossetia, and there also remained overall Georgia, with its capital city of Tbilisi, within its internationally recognized borders, containing the former Soviet Socialist Republic of Georgia. During this period of transition to post-Soviet sovereignty, the country's first president, Gamsa Kurdia, then did a lot in terms of nationalism to alienate the 2 smaller political territorial entities of Abkhazia and South Ossetia from the Georgian independence project. This is the EU writing. This is the EU. And of course, so they're using some euphemism. He did a lot in terms of nationalism to alienate the 2 smaller political territorial entities of Abkhazia and South Ossetia from the Georgian independence project. The fighting that finally broke out between Georgian forces and separatist forces, first in South Ossetia in 1991 to 92, then in Abkhazia in 92-94, ended with Georgia losing control of large parts of both territories. There was support from Russia for their insurrectionists, yet it seems that the Russian political elite and power structures were divided on the issue, aren't they always, and partly involved, and Moscow remained on uneasy terms with Tbilisi at the same time. So there it is. Now, so you can, that's the account from the EU. And in the meantime, we have the Looney Tunes statement from the UK, France, Germany, and Italy. Russia needs to withdraw, internationally recognized frontiers. I mean, say, yeah, what international frontiers? South Ossetia and Abkhazia are not going to return to Georgia. It ain't going to happen any more than Donetsk, Lugansk are going to return to Ukraine. It's just not going to happen. It cannot happen. So that's why this whole thing is this ridiculous, absolutely idiotic posturing that we get from the EU and NATO. Anyway, let us now go to our locals page. This is the Gaggle community. This is the Gaggle community that maintains the Gaggle. It keeps the operation going. They're very generous. It enables us to do the work that we do here, and so we're really, really appreciative of Gaggle community. And as I always say, if you want me to interact with you, if you want to raise questions, debate something, you disagree with me. I know yesterday a number of people disagreed with me when I was Peter and I were discussing Iran. So if you want to disagree with me, you want to challenge me on anything I said, please join our locals community, and then we can absolutely discuss and anything that you take objection to in what I said. So please, very simple to join the gaggle.locals.com. It's a lot of fun. We have some really, really smart, talented, brilliant people here, and so please join, and then you can say whatever you like, object to anything that I say, and and I will try to answer any questions you might have. The gaggle.locals.com. Anyway, Danoki, well, one of our the most active and energetic gagglers, is always working on keeping the Gaggle community informed about everything. He asked the first questions, wishing all Gagglers European-style vacations. Yes, the whole month of August off. I'm off to hit the road for a few weeks. See you later. Well, that's a shame. I mean, I was hoping that you'd be around. I mean, these Tuesdays and Thursdays are never quite the same without Danaki's somewhat pithily, pithy is not quite those, somewhat scabrous descriptions of the various people that he doesn't like, and who often are people that I also happen not to like. So during this month of August, we're going to miss Danaki's sharply worded statements. But anyway, have a good time wherever you're going. And then it says, no matter what the naysayers say in US, Russia, or wherever, nothing beats the Europeans at vacationing. Oh, yes, there's no question. So wherever you are in Europe, it's quite extraordinary how for the month of August, and this goes incidentally for Russia as well. The month of August is the month that everyone just takes off. It's like, there's nothing to do. So you can go off camping or just vacationing, and it's one of the things that I found most striking when I came to Hungary after living many years in the United States is that Americans work. You can criticize America all you want. You can find this or that shortcoming in the United States, but the one thing you cannot gainsay America is they do work. I mean, wherever you are, Americans working. Now, it may be that they're they're getting screwed over. They work too much, too many hours, and they don't get paid enough for the amount of work that they put in. But things don't shut down in the United States for the whole month of August. Things don't shut down at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock. So if you have an issue, you want your computer fixed, you want your bicycle fixed. There's always going to be something open. Where you want to. Okay, well, I know this place is going to be open till 9. So there's always this. It's a very different culture. But Europe, yep, August go by, and when you look at it, the same thing goes on in Russia. They've retained some of the Soviet era practices. Oh well, hey, we're going to just take the month off, and then you kind of wonder. There's something of a war going on. No, I mean, don't you need to be kind of busy with whatever needs to be done in order to fight the war? No, 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 no. August is for vacationing. So anyway, I hope to see you soon, Danaki. So sorry to lose you for a few weeks, but looking forward to seeing you soon. And then we have Cynthia. Cynthia, of course, our film scholar, film expert, film commentator, film critic, who's always informing Gagglers about the minutiae and intricacies of cinema, film history, film production. So, there's almost nothing that she doesn't know about cinema in all its genres in one country, another country, and everything that went into the making of films in different eras and in different countries. And we're always very fortunate to have Cynthia um, uh, enlighten us and educate us about film, and particularly when we have our weekly screenings. And that's we post the film on Mondays, but of course it's available for Gagglers. One more reason to join the Gagglers. So there's always a film to watch, and of course all the films that we have had in our Monday night screenings, they're all within the Gaggle archive, so you can look up whatever film you want, and you can still watch it. And the important thing is not just that you can watch the films, but you can read and enjoy Cynthia's comments and informed background information, and very, very astute aesthetic judgments, comparison of one genre with another, one era with another, all of that, the kind of things that you may not have been thinking about, but Cynthia will keep you abreast of it. And so if you're interested in film, you're interested in cinema history, and who isn't, then the Gaggle is the place to learn about it, and particularly at with when you enjoy Cynthia's very learned commentary. So this week we're screening in commemoration of, well, I don't know if commemoration is the right word, in to mark the heat wave of August, to mark the heat wave, with featuring films that focus on extreme heat and discomfort arising from extreme heat. And this this week's film is a great film, a great film from the 1980s, Body Heat, starring William Hurt and Kathleen Turner. And it's really one of the finest examples of the neo-noir genre. And so watch the film and read Cynthia's comments, and particularly read her comments about the neo-noir, the significance of that neo-noir moment in American cinema. And of course, that harkens back to the earlier moment of American film history, which was the film noir, which was really the signature genre of American cinema, which was then taken up by the Europeans, and the Europeans kind of celebrated American cinema, and they regarded the greatest achievement of American cinema was the film noir. And then, of course, in the 1970s and 80s, we had the elaboration of the film noir, which is the neo noir. But Cynthia can explain all this much better than I can. So see Body Heat if you haven't seen it. Great film from the 1980s, and find out something about the neo noir and the film noir from Cynthia. Anyway, thank you, Cynthia. Anyway, Cynthia's question today is Turkey's role in the Black Sea is a key act of balance. Russia taking Odessa and the full north coast would make it the top power in the region, weaken Turkey's role, and put its trade and security goals at risk. Yet Turkey has deep ties with Russia in energy, trade, tourism, and major projects. Ankara is thus seeking to limit further Russian gains while avoiding a full break with Moscow and preserving its role as a key regional power and NATO member, while also protecting its long-term interests. And then Cynthia then goes on. The Turkish Straits give Ankara key leverage over the Black Sea. Turkey has taken steps to limit some traffic to Russian ports and backed a Black Sea ceasefire to protect trade and aid in Ukraine. A more bold but still unlikely step would be to let NATO warships enter the Black Sea, which Turkey hasn't allowed since 2022. If the Black Sea became a Russian lake, NATO could rely even more on Turkey's control of the Straits and check Russian naval power, giving Ankara greater weight within the alliance. And then, anyway, it goes on. Bulgaria and Romania are taking very different paths on the war on Ukraine. Bulgaria is staying out of the fight. Okay, well, let's first of all deal then with the Black Sea. I think, yeah, I think your analysis is spot on. I think the current war that Ukraine really started this in the Black Sea, and then of course Russia retaliated hard. And I don't think this was exactly the Russian plan. But once Ukraine launched the attacks, serious attacks on Crimea, and then of course on Russian ships, cargo ships in the Black Sea, it was inevitable that Russia would retaliate, and is essentially, just demolishing not just Ukrainian ports such as Odessa and Nikolaev, but also the port infrastructure. So it's sort of now looking as if, if this continues, Ukraine would be landlocked. Now, I don't think Ukraine is wholly, upset about this, because I think Ukraine may think that this is the way to provoke the NATO intervention against Russia. So if Ukraine becomes essentially a landlocked power, in other words, if it loses its access to the Black Sea, that might be just enough to get NATO and the United States to be much more seriously engaged against Russia and get themselves in a direct shooting war with Russia. I think that may be the calculation. Turkey is, obviously it's very unhappy about this and does not want, as you say, doesn't want the Black Sea to become a Russian lake. So Turkey, I think now is doing what Turkey always does. It suddenly starts talking about ceasefires. Oh, we need a ceasefire. We need a ceasefire. We need to bring trade in the Black Sea to a normal situation. And so it's pleading. In other words, it's using its good relations, and it's always maintained good relations with Russia, so that Erdogan goes to his good friend Putin and says, "Hey, look, we need a ceasefire. Let's go back to the ceasefire we had in 2022, and let's leave the shipping in the Black Sea in place, and let the grain come out and so on." it traditionally it has worked with Erdogan. Erdogan did manage to get a Black Sea ceasefire in place in 2022. I mean, this had taken place then as well. The Russia Ukraine were hitting one another's cargo ships, and Erdogan stepped in and said, "Okay, let's end this as a ceasefire in the Black Sea," and that worked in 2022. And then, of course, Erdogan did something similar in Syria. If you recall, when Russia and Bashar al-Assad were decided to launch their campaign against Idlib in the northwest of Syria to get rid of these essentially the Turkey's proxy force that had embedded itself in Idlib. Erdogan made his pitch to Putin, and then Putin said, "Okay, well, we'll hold off. We're not going to attack Idlib." Of course, that was a catastrophic decision because, of course, Idlib then became the center of this Turkey-backed forces. It was an Al Qaeda, the kind of the biggest center of Al Qaeda in the world, and that was from where Giuliani emerged in 2024 and launched his offensive to oust Bashar al-Assad. So Putin made a really, really bad decision for the sake of his friend Erdogan in not taking out Idlib when he could have done in 2018. So now the question is, Turkey is doing exactly the same thing. Then these attacks on Odessa and Nikolaev are annoying him. I mean, he doesn't like it at all. So boom, absolutely like clockwork, Turkey is now demanding a ceasefire, and they're making their pleas to the Russians. Yeah, we're going to get the ceasefire. We're going to, this is terrible. World trade is in chaos. The global South isn't getting its food, and so on and so on and so forth. It worked for him before. It's worked before Erdogan. I have my doubt that it'll work this time. I think the Russians really are quite fed up with everything, and they're probably quite fed up with Erdogan. They've invested a great deal in him, and he is what he is, a very slippery customer. And I think the Russian leadership is always a little opaque, but I think Putin is coming increasingly under pressure to bring this war to an end. That I think the Russian people, I think the Russian leaders, they're getting fed up with this. And I think this is coming under pressure that no more of these ceasefires, no more of these temporary agreements, no more of these negotiations with Erdogan, or even Trump for that matter. Just get the job done. Finish Ukraine off. So I tend to think this is going to continue. I think the Russians are just going to pulverize Ukraine's Black Sea coast. I think it's just going to end Odessa and Nikolaev and all of the other major Ukrainian ports as part of their demolition of Ukraine. So essentially, no more access to the Black Sea. And that means your whole trade routes, your industrial hinterland are in trouble. So I don't think Erdogan's plan to bring some kind of a ceasefire in the Black Sea is going to work. I hope not. I mean, I think this war needs to come to an end. I mean, we don't want any more of these pointless ceasefires, which are then always used to continue the war. So anyway, Cynthia then goes on. Bulgaria and Romania are taking very different paths on the war in Ukraine. Bulgaria is staying out of the fight, while Romania is taking a more active role. This is tied to its use as a key route for arms sent to Ukraine. Yeah, I agree. This reflects EU pressure, with EU leaders shaping Romania's politics to back their goals rather than the will of its people. This has drawn Romania closer to the war and raised the risk of a wider conflict, added security risks and greater costs for the country. Absolutely. And then Cynthia goes on. Evidently, war is also hurting Romania's economy. A risk in the Black Sea has made ships less willing to use the port of Constanta due to its close link to the war zone. This has hurt trade and added to the strain on Romania's economy. Lower ship traffic could also weaken the port's role as a key trade hub for the region. Romania's role in the war may thus bring both higher risk and higher costs with few clear gains for its economy. Oh, well, everything is correct. I mean, the EU and NATO got what they wanted when they stole that election, or canceled that election in was it yeah, I think it was 2024. I mean, I can't remember, was it 2024 when Georgescu, who really was saying a kind of Romania first policy. Romania should stay out of this war. There's nothing in it for Romania, and for the very reasons that Cynthia's pointed out. It's obviously affecting Romania adversely. So he said, yeah, Romania should stay out. And then lo and behold, the EU jumped in through the agency of Romania's constitutional court and just simply canceled the election, the election that Georgescu was on the brink of winning. So they're getting, NATO and the EU are getting, rewarded in spades for what they did. So this new regime, this guy, this president Dan, and he's basically he's on hand always, obviously in gratitude for having this presidency had been delivered to him. So in gratitude, he's the most hawkish, among the most hawkish of the East European states on Russia and Ukraine. And as you said, there's nothing in it for Romania. How the disruption of trade in the Black Sea obviously affects Romania negatively, but there's also all the drones. So we now these drones that enter Romanian territory, they're becoming a regular part of life. Now this new regime, the Dan regime, they only scream about drone incursions when they think that they can accuse Russia of being behind them. Oh, it's Russia, then they're screaming. And then all the NATO yapping chihuahuas, scream in unison. Among the loudest is, of course, embarrassingly, Hungary's foreign minister Anita Orban. She's always among the first to start screaming about Russian drones. But of course, everybody else does, and then von der Leyen and Kaya Kallas, drone, drone, drone. But of course, when it's a drone that can be identified as coming from Romania, from Ukraine, then nothing. We don't hear anything. Now, something similar has happened in Bulgaria. We talked about this on Sunday. We've had a drone, which obviously came from Ukraine, and Bulgaria is obviously very unhappy about this. Almost no media coverage, as is entirely to be expected. But that's the. But Bulgaria made clear, and they summoned the Ukrainian ambassador. Obviously, not very happy about drones landing in Bulgaria. But I tend to think that, particularly in the case of Bulgaria, that was a deliberate attack by Ukraine, and it was a way of coercing Bulgaria, because Bulgaria, particularly under this the new prime minister Radev, has been very unenthusiastic about this war in Ukraine. And Radev has said, include us out of the coalition of the willing. We don't want to be a part of the coalition of the willing. We want this war to come to an end. Well, they, I think, mean, they genuinely mean we want this war to come to an end. Not the same way that when we were talking earlier about the Frankfurter Allgemeine, which lies when he says we want the war to come to an end. They mean we want the war to continue until Russia is defeated. But Bulgaria really wants this war to come to an end. So Bulgaria says we're not a part of the coalition of the willing. And Bulgaria also said that we're not going to support the 21st package of sanctions if it involves a sanction against the Holy Father Kirill. So Bulgaria has decided to pursue a different course, and I think it's coming under some pressure from the EU and NATO, whereas Romania is very much in the EU NATO mainstream, and of course the all of the consequences that you say is absolutely right, and that goes also for other NATO states that boast about how anti-Russian they are, how they go out of their way to be as anti-Russian as possible, including Finland. And Finland has been hit terribly economically by essentially closing itself off again from Russian tourists, because that was a major source of income for Finland. But Finland, they're happy with it. So despite the fact that it's brought nothing but economic pain to ordinary Finns, they say, oh, so that's the kind of contemporary Europe, Romania and Finland. They pursue a policy that does absolutely nothing good for them. Anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia. So, as I say, just as a reminder, please join the Gaggle, thegaggle.locals.com. Watch our movies and the Body Heat, fantastic film, and enjoy Cynthia's accompanying commentary. Now, Marty, as always, introduces himself with some fascinating photo. All right, now this is a real challenge. Now, who this is? Well, that these are all this is very tough. Well, the interesting thing is that so many figures from in Europe today are so interchangeable that when I look at that face, and Marty has done a very clever thing here. He's done a close up of the face, but it's hard to tell who exactly it is, because it could be Friedrich Merz, but it isn't Friedrich Merz. It could be Alexander Stubb. That's a possibility. Yeah, Alexander Stubb. I mean, I thought for maybe it's Mark Rutte, but I don't think it's Mark Rutte. Yeah, I'd still go for they're not exactly the same glasses as Stubb normally wears. So this is a real tough one as to who this who this is. I mean, I'm feeling that I would probably go for Stubb, but I'm not. But I get a sense that it's not Alexander Stubb. The grin definitely is an inane, demented grin of the kind that we're familiar with, the inane, demented people who run Europe. But as I say, so many of these faces, they're kind of interchangeable. So it's very hard to say, oh, I think it's so-and-so and not so-and-so. So, yeah, I'd still go... so, all right, the thing. Anyways, but anyway, if somebody can tell me, then I'd be grateful. Anne Marie, thank you very much. Always very good to see you. Anne Marie. Anne Marie, of course, is our eminent musician, internationally renowned violinist. Who performs, with the most distinguished orchestras in the world, performs the most difficult music, the most difficult and challenging pieces of music composed the 20th and 21st centuries. And she's member of our community. So another reason, hey, you want to join the gaggle? This is the place where you get to interact with really distinguished musicians, distinguished writers, artists, intellectuals, and Anne Marie's one of them. And Anne Marie was always very generous with her comments and her thoughts about her experiences in playing music. And here we are at the Gaggle. We always have the opportunity to learn so much from her, from her playing experience, what it's like to work with some of the most eminent musicians, composers, and conductors of recent decades. And so, we're just always incredibly grateful for Anne Marie's generosity with her time and her comments, and so in everything. So, thank you so much, Anne Marie. Really appreciate your generosity. And Stone River says, is a question. Stone River, yeah, good to see you. Stone River says, George, would you be able to recount how Bobby Fischer fell foul of the U.S. authorities over Yugoslavia? Yes, what happened was that, if you recall, the Fischer-Spassky match, which really captured the world's imagination. I mean, most people in the world aren't that enthused about chess. But here you had this American genius, Bobby Fischer, who was taking on the Soviet champion, Boris Spassky. And so obviously this is 72, and it was the Cold War, America versus the Soviet Union. And of course, Fischer had, he had denounced the Soviets. He had denounced, he thought that the Soviets were kind of rigging the chess championship. They were trying to keep the championship to themselves, and they didn't want anyone else to get a look in. So he swept through the ranks and swept through the whole championship to reach the final. And so the final took place in Reykjavik, and everyone was following it. Everyone in the world was following this because it was, the Cold War, America versus the Soviet Union, and particularly the United States was led by Bobby Fischer, who had denounced the Soviets. Well, as you know, I mean, Spassky started strong, but then Fischer recovered, and then eventually Bobby Fischer prevailed, and so Bobby Fischer became the world chess champion. And then, of course, he came to the United States, and naturally, he was a hero of the United States. He had slain the Russians, and everyone was gleeful and delighted that Boris Spassky had been humiliated. I remember the news stories reported how Spassky returned to Moscow, and he was a kind of a persona non grata because he had lost, and so on. Anyway, so he, Fischer returns. Fischer, he's welcomed by Richard Nixon at the Oval Office, and then he appears on all the late night talk shows and so on. Everyone loves Bobby Fischer because he secured a great American victory in the Cold War. Anyway, the next year, when Fischer was supposed to defend his title, he didn't want to do it, and he stopped making fuss about this, that, and the other. But eventually, the World Chess Authority said, "Well, I'm sorry, that's it. You forfeit your title. You have to take part in the competition. You have to allow people to compete against you." He didn't want to do that, and so he was disqualified. And I think the next year, the world got a new chess champion. It was back. The Soviets once again had the title. Karpov, Anatoly Karpov, was who looked very Russian. As did Spassky. They looked very Russian. But so this one moment of glory with Bobby Fischer, he was the hero, was very brief. By 73, the Soviets had their chess title back. Anyway, so then Fischer kind of gave up playing chess. He never competed at the in any more of these World Chess Championships. But in 1992, the 20-year anniversary of the Fischer Spassky match, they basically organized the rematch, Fischer versus Spassky, 1992, 20-year, a rematch. But the rematch took place in the former Yugoslavia. Now, that would have been okay, but by 1992, the United States had imposed sanctions against Yugoslavia because it thought that somehow Yugoslavia was, I don't know, committing crimes against Bosnia and Herzegovina, committing crimes in Croatia. The litany of it. That somehow because Yugoslavia was refusing to accept the secession of Croatia, was refusing to accept the secession of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Yugoslavia was supposedly helping the Serbs in Croatia, was supposedly helping the Serbs in Bosnia and Herzegovina. But anyway, the United States imposed sanctions. The UN Security Council, unfairly, it was very, very unfair, but they imposed sanctions against Yugoslavia. So that's it. So Yugoslavia was under sanction. And so if Fischer were to go to Yugoslavia, he would be violating sanctions. And he would be then facing criminal prosecution in the United States. Well, Fischer being Fischer, he said, I don't give it time. I'm going to go and take part in this contest. And there's a famous moment, I think you can probably get it on YouTube, when I think he was indicted. He was indicted in some grand jury. He was indicted for the crime of violating U.S. sanctions. And you can see him when he's handed the sanction, he just spat on it. He spat on the on this document of the indictment of him. So anyway, the rematch took place. Fischer again won. It didn't mean anything because neither was really at the level of world championship. Neither was good enough really to be world champion. But it also meant he was under indictment. If he were to return to the United States, he would be facing criminal prosecution. So he never went back. He just traveled around the world. But still, while he was under indictment by the United States and the crime of violating sanctions. And then, he spent some time in Hungary, he became a kind of a somewhat sad and forlorn figure because he had this moment of glory, and but already it was a long time ago, and he was had all sorts of interesting ideas. I say interesting ideas about things, and then finally, Iceland, because it was difficult for him to live somewhere because he ultimately he faced this indictment from the United States, and then finally Iceland granted him a kind of an honorary citizenship because Fischer had made Iceland famous. I mean, no one really knows anything much about Reykjavik other than there were two things in Reykjavik. Obviously the first big thing was the Fischer Spassky match, But the second thing was it was in 1986, the famous Reagan Gorbachev summit, when they discussed complete nuclear disarmament. That didn't happen, but nonetheless, it was a famous uh, summit between Reagan and Gorbachev. But nonetheless, the big thing was the Fisher Spassky contest, and everyone in the world was obsessed with it. And so they gave him a kind of honorary citizenship, and that's where he died. Somewhat, I mean, really by now a somewhat sad figure. But so yeah, that was, but it was a ridiculous thing. It was the sanctions against Yugoslavia was ridiculous. And Fisher himself, he was just not a political person. He thought, hey, this is a great idea. There would be some money. There was obviously a lot of interest in a rematch between Fisher and Spassky. So, but it was staged in Yugoslavia, and that was it. So you're in violation of sanctions. Stupid bloody thing. But yeah, that was, and so that was it. He never returned to the United States after playing this match in Belgrade. So that's the story. So thank you very much, Stone River, and then Robert. Always good to see you, Robert. Thank you very much, Robert, as always, for your generosity. George, we've talked about Mamdani's rise in New York and Abdul El Said's success in Michigan. I wonder whether their success is in response to genuine market failure, or whether it's market failure caused by political intervention, which gives socialists their opening. Zoning and regulatory compliance, for example, have helped create a severe housing shortage, yet the resulting scarcity and high prices are pinned on markets and capitalism. And then and then Robert says, apropos of something different, as he recited with an excellent accent, the Bundesnachrichtendienst is called to mind Wilde's observation that German is not at all a becoming language to its speaker. You certainly have a point there. It's is it really the socialism? I mean, there's really obviously a shortage of housing, and that has led to these insane spike in prices. The reason I'm skeptical. I mean, I could see the argument. I mean, but back in the golden era of rent control and rent stabilization, people could afford to live in New York. I mean, when I first came to New York, I mean, the rent stabilization was still in place, and I could find an apartment. I mean, it was a sublet, obviously, and obviously there was cheating involved, because if you have a rent stabilized apartment, you're not actually supposed to sublet it. I mean, it's supposed to be your primary residence. But there's cheating, and you could sublet an apartment, and you could live in a nice part of town, and it was affordable. That was in the when did I arrive? It was the late 1980s. So I could live in New York at that time. Now the rent stabilization was, I mean, and granted there was a lot of cheating going on. I mean, like Ed Koch lived in a kind of a huge apartment in Greenwich Village, for which he paid some ridiculous sum of money, and those everyone knew about these stories of this cheating and unfairness of people having gigantic apartments for which they paid virtually nothing, but nonetheless it was still affordable for many people. And you had for want of a better word, you had white middle class people living in Manhattan. not very rich people, just ordinary people who lived in Manhattan, ordinary people who were, could afford to bring up families in Manhattan. They didn't necessarily have to go to the suburbs, or whatever. Now, when they finally eliminated all the various rent controls, the rent stabilization, this took place in the mid 1990s, and that was supposed. There was a whole argument about this, that once you remove the market controls, then suddenly there's going to be a lot of building. People, there's going to be lots and lots of new apartment buildings built, and there'll be affordable housing. Once you've taken out the artificial prices, there's going to be an abundance. I mean, that was an argument constantly being made. The reason why there's a housing shortage in New York is that it's not profitable to build new apartments. It's not profitable for landlords to invest in their buildings because they can't get any more money because of rent stabilization. Well, rent stabilization went. It was mid 90s. Basically, New York got rid of rent stabilization. Now prices have gone through the roof. No one can live in New York. I mean, it's just, it would be complete fantasy that somebody like me could arrive in New York, as I did in the 1980s, and find some nice place in Manhattan that I could afford. I mean, it cannot happen. I mean, everything is just unaffordable. So I think that there is that kind of the frustration that has led to the rise of Mandani. The somehow, nothing is affordable. That you just simply cannot live in New York City. It's unless you're in finance or law, you're at the top of your profession, when you can afford these insane rents, but no one else can. So that, I think, that's led to the Mamdani. I don't think Mamdani can do anything very much about that. He can't bring back rent control. He cannot bring back rent stabilization. It cannot happen. That can only be done at the state level, and that basically, they changed the law in the 1990s, and when Pataki became governor, and then Republicans controlled the state legislature, and so they ended it. But so that, I think, is gone, and so so you could certainly argue, and that market prices distort, market restrictions distort prices and so on. But even if you distort prices, at least it is affordable. So if you remove the price controls, suddenly nothing is affordable. No one can live in New York City anymore. That's it. It's just gone. If you look at the sort of rent, how much I paid for an apartment. So if I were to go back now, to that apartment that I lived in, let's say in 1988, and look at it now, it's probably now been chopped into two, and each one is almost certainly about 5 times what I paid for the whole apartment. So that's just in whatever 30 plus years that's happened. And that's a result of removing the price control. So I'm not basically, I'm not convinced that if you just have the free market, you're going to have the affordability. Where are the new buildings? Where are the new apartments? Where is the affordable housing? It isn't there. And something kind of similar happened in Britain, but I mean, it's a little different. But somehow in the Thatcher Revolution, we were also promised that we'd have, we'll end the council houses and so on, and now there's going to be affordable housing. There's no affordable housing. I mean, absolutely, it's just when the affordable housing that I remember growing up in London, I mean, it's just a very distant memory. So the Thatcher Revolution didn't deliver affordable housing. That's right. No, but I think there is always a market for a populism. People say, "Hey, we're very unhappy And Mamdani picks up on it. And I think there is a market for kind of a left wing populism, which is, hey, why is the government preoccupying itself with all sorts of big things, the big issues? What about ordinary people who can't afford the basic necessities? So I think it's all it's a pitch. It's a good pitch. I don't think it can. I don't think it can work nationally, though it did work for Trump. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think Mamdani, Abdul El Said, they have tapped into an obvious unhappiness, the same unhappiness that Trump tapped into, the same unhappiness that Ross Perot, Pat Buchanan tapped into, which is, hey, why are you preoccupying yourself with all sorts of stupid international issues when people can't have enjoy affordable housing here at home. But I think if it in a matter of right wing populism versus left wing populism, I think right wing populism wins in America, not necessarily everywhere else. In the UK, I think left wing populism probably defeats right wing populism. I'm not sure, but I tend to think that Farage is not going to, Farage and Rupert Lowe are not going to win out in the UK. So I think that a left wing populism, I think, is much more likely. But in the US, I think there's always much of a kind of Tucker Carlson, you know, maybe JD Vance or something variation on that. I think is much more likely to succeed than a younger generation of Bernie Sanders. I don't think a young version of Bernie Sanders will ever prevail in the U.S. But anyway, thank you so much, Robert. And oh God, yes, Anne Marie. Thank you, Anne Marie. Anne Marie posts a picture of Reinhard Galen. There he is. Looks kind of somewhat forlorn there. Who'd have thunk? Who'd have thunk that he was this, kind of a really powerful figure within the Wehrmacht, and then as I said earlier, he made himself useful. He was arrested by the Americans, but he had made himself useful. He knew this war was coming to an end, so he had this microfiche, all the material that he had about the Soviet Union, about Soviet military capabilities, and he showed them to the Americans and said, hey, you want to put me to use? And the Americans said, yes, please. And there he was, and then he set up the Galen organization. But there he is. And as I say, he went on. He went on until I think 1969 is when he retired with great honors and everyone else. A great German. He retired a great German. Reinhard Galen. Thank you so much, Anne Marie, for that picture. And then Aristotle, good to see you, Aristotle. And Aristotle says, when you are right, you are very right. Oh, thank you very much. Do you have any idea why Russia has not blown up the Dnieper bridges, even though polls show most Ukrainians see peace? I can't see it even if Russia takes Donbass, and some people are claiming is imminent. Do you have any hope for a collapse? I tend to. I don't know why they haven't done it. I know the argument. Oh well, they don't want to destroy Ukraine. They're hoping still to make it a viable state and everything else. But I don't understand that logic. I mean, you've got a war now. I mean, it's a war. It's a bit bloody late now to start worrying about the non-viability of a future Ukrainian state. I mean, it's already non-viable. It's already endured horrific destruction. You might as well destroy the bridges if that brings the war to an end. And I would have thought it would help. I mean, I absolutely would have thought that if you're going to take Kherson and Zaporozhye, you need to destroy the bridges. Now, do I see collapse? I don't see any collapse. I really don't, and I don't. We're continually being told that it could happen at any moment, but I haven't seen any evidence of this. And more seriously, and I think you allude to it in your comment, even if you take the entirety of the Donbass, and then you take the entirety of Kherson and Zaporozhye, you take all of that, And we're still a long way from that. That's still a big deal for Russia to take all of that. The war goes on. As long as the rest of Ukraine doesn't collapse, and I don't think it will collapse, and I don't think NATO will allow it to collapse. I completely disagree with everyone who says, "Oh, NATO will just will wash its hands of Ukraine and will allow Ukraine to collapse." NATO will not allow Ukraine to collapse. So therefore, the war goes on. All that has happened is Russia has moved the boundaries, or not the boundary. The Russia has moved the border between it and NATO some miles westward. So where NATO had moved the border between NATO and Russia eastward, Russia has kind of reversed it a little bit and has moved it westward. Okay, that's I guess some kind of an accomplishment. But its main problem, which is this aggressive, hostile NATO on its borders, that hasn't gone away. And using NATO as a battering ram against using Ukraine by NATO as a battering ram against Russia, that also has not gone away, and so therefore it'll just go on. And there are forces, many powerful forces within NATO and the United States that want this war to continue. They think, fine, they don't care how many Ukrainians you kill, how many Russians you kill. They want this war to continue. And I think, as things stand, I think it will continue, even if Russia succeeds in moving its confrontation line with NATO a few hundred miles westward. Anyway, thank you very much, Aristotle. And here is, let's all right, let's just, this is the sorrow and the pity. Marty has posted that. Yeah, that was, we had that, we had that screening. Thank you so much, Marty. Have you been told this? Oh, it is Stub. It is Stub. I got it right. I got Stub right. Oh, thank you. Stub. Cynthia also says it's Stub. God, what a grotesque figure! I think Marty has a sadistic impulse. You know, he introduces these horrific pictures. So, oh my God! Though I think the picture I introduced earlier of this guy who is the head of the German Internal Security Service, I think I won this one. I think he really looks a creep. I mean, this is the guy who runs the the German equivalent of MI5 or FBI or whatever. Boy, I mean, this is. He looks even worse than Heinrich Himmler. I think it almost. I don't know. Even Heinrich Himmler, I thought was better looking than he is. Anyway, Summer Petros welcomes us. Good evening, George and Gagglers. I have no questions. I've heard enough. Well, I hope you heard good things, so nothing bad. But anyway, thank you everybody who joined me. Thank you above all to all of your questions and comments, and Marty for your photo, Cynthia for your really interesting, intriguing questions. Thank you, Anne Marie, for that photo of Reinhard Gehlen. That's kind of nice. Here we are, 2026, and we can look at Reinhard Gehlen. So thank you everyone for tonight, and we will be back on Thursday at the same time. I hope to see you then. Until then, all the best. Good night.